I was thinking about what the mayor said about that slave who fought for freedom and yet died in chains. And I don't know how many mayors in America would fight so hard for an event that would occur long after they left office. Mayor Garcetti will not be our mayor in 2028. He might be something else, but he worked really hard to bring the games here. One more time, thank you to the LADC for the report. Some eye-popping numbers, huh? By the way, I asked you to look at your phones. You might want to look at them now and check your calendar for July 21. It's a Sunday because I'm happy to say, for everybody here in attendance today, courtesy of Paul Raybill and the Premier Lacrosse League, there are a pair of tickets for the league's All-Star game on July 21, a Sunday, available at the desk where you registered. So be sure to, if you don't have anything on your calendar for the 21st, this is something fabulous because it's going to take place at the Bank of California Stadium in downtown Los Angeles. By show of hands, how many of you have attended something there already? There's an awful lot of people who've not been there yet. This is, in my opinion, one of the most visually impressive facilities in the country. You definitely want to go. And of course, Premier Lacrosse League would be something fun to watch. Worthwhile and available to you, so be sure to pick those up at the registration desk. How many of you can identify the following sound? Boom. Bloom, 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 bloom. I played Pong, the original computer game. And how many of you remember that game? You know, Atari Pong, that's a long time ago. Well, I gotta tell you, one of the most noteworthy developments in sport over the last decade has been the emergence of video gaming as a competitive and now even a professionalized activity. Who saw this coming? Not me. I had no clue that this was going to happen. Well, it is here now. The talk about esports at the Olympic Games is only beginning. We got to remember to ask tomorrow's panel about sports and betting about what the odds are, whether esports will be part of the Olympic Games in 2028. I'll be curious to see. If you feel a little bit behind in your knowledge about esports and the industry and where it's headed, you're in the right place. Our panel, part tutorial, part discussion, will catch you up. It'll be led by the Sports Council board member, the San Francisco managing partner and head of sports group of the national law firm Arent Fox. It's Richard Brand. Let's hear it for Richard and his team.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Take a look at me, okay? I'm going to bar mitzvah later. That's why I'm dressed like this. I am clearly on the wrong panel, aren't I? Okay, esports. Chuck's wearing a sport jacket. I don't even know why he thought to do that, but you know. I told these guys the reason why I'm wearing a suit is we all know esports has maybe, what, 2 years left? Year and a half left? What was 2 years? Let's give it 5 years because there's a wind down period. So I didn't want to be the one who wasn't wearing a suit. I'm really excited about being here today, and honestly, esports is, I can't say it's the next big thing because it's now the big thing. It used to be the next big thing. And when we were going to put this panel together, one of the things that I wanted to do, and I will make my introductions in a second, but one of the things I thought was going to be very useful is I thought it would be important for those, some of us know all about it, some of us don't, so as was explained a second ago, this is sort of a two-part panel. There is a little bit of a tutorial, so I can learn something, and then there's going to be a great panel discussion so the rest of us who already knew could learn it. So it's a two-part thing, but let's start with the panel. I'm really excited about this. I'm going to start with, and this is going to be the canned portion where I'm actually going to read stuff because I can't remember all this stuff. So we're going to start with, well, it's either Chris Hopper or Chopper. It could be either get it, C, Hopper, Chopper. It took me, by the way, it took me 3 weeks to figure that out. So that should tell you that should tell you how smart I am. But we're really super lucky to have Chopper here. Chopper's the head of esports for North America. I'm reading this, and the head of esports for North America at Riot.
Yes.
Literally, it doesn't say Riot. He's just the head of esports in North America, which is even better. Chopper oversees the operation of the League of Legends Championship Series, the premier league for the world's most popular esport in the United States and Canada. Under his leadership, the LCS incorporated a franchise model, creating long-term partnerships with esports stalwarts such as TSM, Cloud9, and Team Liquid, as well as traditional sports teams such as the Golden State Warriors, the Cleveland Cavs, and Houston Rockets. During his tenure, the LCS attracted sponsors like Dell Alienware, State Farm in Jersey, Mike's, and saw the average starting salary for players rise above $320,000. Additionally, Chris works alongside the College League of Legends team to advise on its development in North America, which currently sees the participation of 300 colleges and universities. Prior to his position as the head of esports for Riot for North America, Chris Hopper worked on the Central Riot Games esports team that first launched League of Legends as an international esports around the world. So really glad to have you here, Chopper. Appreciate you joining us. Next on the list, Bryce Blum. I want to tell you something. I saw Bryce at the Sports Lawyers Association conference maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I saw he was even younger then, go figure. And I'm listening to this guy talking, and I'm going, wow, this guy really gets this stuff. First thing I said was, can we get him to join the law firm? And then when the laughing stopped, we decided we would just become friends.
Later tonight, he's going to my bar mitzvah, in fact. So.
Yeah. And this is how he dresses for his bar mitzvah, okay? I'll get you. We have a LA Sports Summit tallis that we'll put around you a little later.
Perfect.
Anyway, Bryce is the founding partner at ESG Law, the world's only dedicated esports law firm, where he represents preeminent esports teams, talent, and institutions. Bryce's work spans across the esports landscape. He's worked on major deals involving every esports title, and his clients range from long-standing endemic esports entities to the ownership groups of major traditional sports teams from the NBA, NFL, NHL, and MLB. Bryce also serves as a preeminent esports consultant, advising major sports teams and owners, brands, and investors on how to successfully enter and navigate the esports space. Bryce is a member of the Forbes 30 Under 30 and the Sports Business Journal 40 Under 40. By the way, I'm looking forward to being in the Sports Business Journal 70 Under 70. I was told I'm not even a shoo-in for that. Back to the discussion. Whoops, lost the mic for a second. Bryce is a contributing writer for ESPN and drives industry standards as a thought leader on key legal and business issues facing all aspects of the esports ecosystem. Thanks for coming, Bryce. And Bryce is going to have a little small introduction right after we're finished with this. Chuck Steedman. I've known Chuck for a long time, although I didn't know Chuck was an esports guy until probably the last 2 years. Chuck's been with AEG since June of 2008, and since July of 2018 has served as AEG Facilities LLC Chief Operating and Development Officer, overseeing the company's day-to-day operations of stadia, arenas, and convention centers around the globe. He directly manages the company's financial content development, operational, commercial, and human resources, and plays a significant role in business development domestically and abroad. From March 2014 to June 2018, he served as the company's Chief Operating Officer. Chuck's also a member of the Anschutz Company's Data Steering Committee. Thanks, Chuck. Glad to have you here. Chuck has already told me he's not going to give me any grief publicly, only privately, so nobody leave. Last but not least, Ari Siegel. I think Ari and I met about 2 years ago, and at that point, maybe more than 2 years ago, the NHL All-Star Game, whenever that was, weren't in esports at the time. Ari is CEO of Immortals LLC, a global esports organization based in Los Angeles. Immortals, founded in 2015, has raised strategic investment from AEG, thank you, Chuck, Lionsgate, the Milken family, Meg Whitman, and Steve Kaplan. The franchise owns and operates the Los Angeles Valiant, one of 2 Los Angeles-based franchises in Activision Blizzard's Overwatch League, which launched in January 2018. Immortals competes in Rainbow Six, Siege and Mobile Esports title Clash Royale, and in 2018 relaunched the Brazilian heritage brand MIBR for its CSGO team, the most popular and competitively successful team in the world. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us, Ari.
We're also back in League of Legends.
Yeah.
As of last week.
We can all be friends again. Yay.
I didn't even know they weren't friends. Okay.
We always were friends. I think that was the issue.
The guy without the suits is always the guy with the suit is always in trouble. Well, we're a little short on time, so thank you all for coming. But I'm glad you got to meet the panel. So yeah, there's nothing here that says laugh. There probably should be. So there we go, laugh. So here's where we're going to start, and this is actually a real treat. I saw a video that Bryce had done maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even more, about esports. And honestly, I didn't know very much about esports. And I sat down, I watched the video. I thought this was an amazing description of the entire esports industry. I showed it to my wife, who's not a big sports fan. She was mesmerized, and then she said, "How come you don't do cool things?" She did say that, but she's not here today because she's already seen the video. But what we thought we would do is take 10, 15 minutes, and Bryce is going to walk us through the ecosystem called esports, just to give you a little bit of a background, and then afterwards we're going to sit down and we're going to have a panel discussion on some of the items that he's discussed in his overview and any other ones. So Bryce, why don't we start?
Sounds great. Thanks, Rich. So as Rich said, I kind of drew the short straw, so it's my job to give everyone here the crash course you need in esports to be able to understand what the heck the rest of us are talking about for the remaining 45 minutes of the panel. So I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So like any good lawyer, I want to start by defining my terms, right? What are esports? What is an esport, right? Esports is the umbrella term that refers to professional competitive video gaming. You'll hear us use it a lot today. It's in the title of the panel. The reality is you can't paint all esports with a broad brush, just like you can't paint all traditional sports with a broad brush. As with traditional sports, we have our, League of Legends, right? The equivalent of our NBA. We also have the equivalent of Frisbee golf, right? Where you have mostly people playing it for fun, casually. Not a lot of people are watching it yet, though stay tuned, because if I'm going pro in a sport, it's going to be that. Right? So it's also not the same thing as video games, right? Esports are to video games what the NBA is to basketball. You have a lot of people who are playing these sports in a casual way. The sports element of it, or in our case, the esports element of it, is when you have something that is played at a really high level and also watched, right? It becomes a spectator experience. That being said, esports is a very small niche of the video game business right now. Right? So you look at this chart up here and it's telling you kind of the landscape of what we're talking about from boiling down. Not every video game can be an esport. If you're a legend at Candy Crush, that's awesome. I'm sorry to say it's very unlikely there are going to be millions of people watching you do that. But that's okay, right? Then you do a breakdown of the economics associated with these things, right? Video games are already the second largest entertainment industry in the world. Esports considerably smaller right now. With that said, I think everyone up here would agree we have more than a couple of years left, right? The slope of the graph of esports fans, I don't know what it is. All I can tell you is that it's going up and to the right, and that's not changing anytime soon, right? So as we're talking about esports, I want to make sure that everyone can get really familiar with what an esport actually looks like, so I thought I'd pull a couple of quick clips for you. This is a clip of last year's Tetris World Championships. And if you're noticing an age differential that looks something like the age differential between Rich and I up here, that's not a mistake. The guy on the left side of your screen, Joseph, is 16 years old, which for those of you keeping score at home means he was not alive when the game Tetris was created.
He didn't get the piece all the way over there. He's got 100,000 lead.
So the reigning 8-time world champion, Jonas, has just Tetrised out. He is ahead in score, and so now we're just watching to see if Joseph can get ahead of him in score in order to win the Tetris World Championship.
3 more. The pressure is on the kid right now.
Crazy build going on.
Always going for the Tetris.
He held out. Boom. Tetris for Joseph.
Boom.
Can he do it?
Away.
He's one away. 1 and change will do it. Oh. And a long bar. Is it going to come? Where is it? Or is there going to be a drought? How's this going to play out? Oh,
okay,
he takes the double.
Perfect. It's set up now. He's still
just
waiting. 13-piece drought. 17-piece drought. There's the long bar. There it is. Tetris.
And we have a new Tetris World Champion. Yay! Okay, so start with accessible, right? Everyone gets Tetris. Everyone knows what's going on. Let's watch something that I find extremely accessible. I think it's on the more accessible end of esports. That being said, before I play this clip, I just want to put something in perspective. Imagine you spent the last, your entire life in a bomb shelter and you had never watched a football game before, and someone dropped you in the middle of a football stadium. You're in the Coliseum on a Saturday watching USC play, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. Like, good luck understanding what a down is, let alone, the difference between zone defense and man-to-man and what's going on in the game. So I'm going to play you a clip from last year's North American Finals. This was in a stadium in St. Louis for the North American franchised League of Legends League, which Chopper oversees and runs.
Jensen is just enormous at this point of the
So
game.
we start with the color commentator who's setting the stage for the final fight of the game.
For his first title, but the TV's coming in. This could be TSM's final fight.
Kicks over to the play-by-play commentator so he can take you through the fight.
Here comes Cali as well. A knockup only
tank though. Acadian QSS South, broken blade at half
A lot of things are happening. Don't worry about it.
Is safe. He's still surviving. It's too bad.
Fans going berserk. They show you the player camera so you can see the agony of defeat on the left, and you can see the guy getting excited about winning the championship on the right.
Liquid tie the record. It's 3 LCS titles in a row. They are the super team.
Okay, there's going to be a pop quiz on this later. I hope everyone followed the intricacies of the team fight and who carried and who threw. No, but in all seriousness, right, the point isn't that you understand exactly what happened on that screen, right? Again, if you got airdropped into a football stadium or a baseball stadium, didn't know the rules, it would be hard to figure out what's going on, why the person sometimes runs from second to third and other times just kind of stays there for a little bit, right? Doesn't matter. If you learn the game, you could learn these intricacies. Just as in traditional sports, you have the casual fan that like maybe knows the difference between a down and the hardcore fan that is playing Fantasy League of Legends, right? And it is, as with traditional sports, something that comes to you over time and you come to appreciate the complexities. What I want you to get out of that clip is not what happened, it's what was going on around it, right? If you were in the stadium, you would see the people on the jerseys. If you noticed the sponsor logo in the lower left-hand corner, right? If you heard the screaming fans, if you heard the color and the play-by-play commentary. This was the very end of the match, so you didn't get it because they go straight to the guys hugging each other for the championship. But if this was in the middle of the match, you would have seen instant replay analysis, right? If it was in the middle of it, they would have kicked over to the analyst desk in between games to break down what was happening at our equivalent of halftime and what this team that's losing needs to do to come back into the match, right? Looks a lot like traditional sports. So I pulled a quote from Daryl Morey for this, right, because I needed someone with sports credibility to give me some street cred up here, right? And I agree with this quote. This quote's actually a few years old now. The opportunity in esports is enormous, but unlike in the real world, we're kind of evolving in doggy years, right? Like 2 years in the esports industry is like 15 years in normal humanity. Which is why, if you look at the 2011 League of Legends World Championships, this is what it looks like. Right? This is 8 years ago. It's the currently biggest esport in the world at their world championships. It's essentially, 5 dudes in a basement playing against 5 other dudes. You can see there's like a small crowd in the background. This is that world championship last year. Sold out stadium in Korea. Right? It's easy to hype up League of Legends choppers here, but it's not just a League of Legends phenomenon, it's an esports phenomenon. This is a Counter-Strike major last year in Cologne. This is the Dota major, the international that was held in Vancouver last year. Right? All sold out stadiums to watch a bunch of people play video games. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, depending on your perspective, we didn't just find the 50,000 people who were insane enough to fly them all out to be in stadiums in Cologne and Vancouver and where was the final last year? Incheon, right? In Korea? Yeah, right. We didn't just find those people. There's millions of people watching at home, right? You'll see a graph on the left of traditional sports viewership from last year, a graph on the right of esports viewership. I did not put these things on the same graph for one fundamental reason. We measure esports viewership differently than we measure sports viewership, right? Nielsen is essentially a weighted average of who's watching the broadcast over the course of the thing. Esports numbers tend to be reported in terms of total uniques, how many individuals tuned into a match for at least 1 second during that match. You will see a article out there. It will be on ESPN or it will be on CNBC or whatever it is, and it will seem compelling because of the source, and it will tell you that the viewership of the League of Legends World Championships exceeded the viewership of the Super Bowl. That is false. That is demonstrably false. With that said, I tend not to stress about it, right? Because pick an arbitrary age. Everyone, 35 years old or younger grew up in a world where video games are ubiquitous, right? So if we live in a world in which close to 100 million people tuned in for the League of Legends World Championships, the most popular esport in 2018, fast forward 30, 40, 50 years, right, when almost everyone grew up in that world. I don't know what the most popular esport in the world is. He's hoping it's League of Legends. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But whatever it is, it's as globally ubiquitous as soccer, right? That's the market potential. That's where this is all going. The writing is on the wall. So I don't care so much if the biggest esport is bigger than the biggest traditional sport or where it ranks right now. We are in the same order of magnitude, and we're just getting started. Here's some basic data on the esports audience. You don't need to take a lot away from this slide except to say the viewership or the fan base is continuing to grow at an astronomical rate. We're young, we're relatively affluent, right? There are deep dive market reports you can do on this stuff. I don't want to spend too much time on it here. I want to end this talk by talking about what I refer to as the inflection point. It's the transition from video games being purely a marketing engine or from esports being purely a marketing engine for the underlying game into a standalone monetized set of spectator sports, right? Esports have been around as long as video games, right? We led off with an anecdote about Pong, right? There were Pong tournaments. There were people who were the best Pong players in the world, or at least we thought they were, right? Because they were the best who showed up that day to that tournament. We are now building a real business around the business of esports, and that's something that has only happened in the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years, right? And in many ways, I think this timeline starts off with Riot selling out the Staples Center in 2012. They sold it out in 15-ish minutes, is that about right? Right, for their world championship way back in 2012. Right? They also, you had Twitch, which is the major online platform where this content is consumed, bought by Amazon for, at the time, $1 billion in cash, which was the largest acquisition in the history of Amazon back in 2014. You've had major leagues stood up. You've had ESPN stand up its own vertical solely dedicated to esports, right? You've had major media rights deals with other parties. You've had the launch of franchise leagues. We'll talk about that in a little second. Right, you've had Fortnite, who, if we pulled this room, how much you know about esports going in, I imagine it was, medium-ish. If you ask about Fortnite and anyone has interacted with a 13-year-old in the last 2 years, right, you're probably familiar with Fortnite on some level, right? Question, is it an esport, is it not? Maybe we'll get into that on the panel. It's not a particularly interesting question to me, but I think there's reasonable minds who can disagree about that. While this whole timeline of growth of the industry was going on, you had the gold rush in team investments, right? So you had major investments from the likes of Shaq and A-Rod. You had Steve Kaplan get into Immortals way back in 2015. You had Peter Guber and Ted Leonsis invest in Team Liquid, right? You had the Philadelphia 76ers launch their own esports division and acquire a long storied franchise in Dignitas. Right? That gold rush only continued in 2017, where you saw more big sports names pour in, right? You have Lionsgate get into Immortals, for example. AEG gets into Immortals in 2017. And then we launched some franchise leagues. And we had a whole bunch of traditional sports team owners say, that was the moment I was waiting for. I needed something where I felt like I could attach to it. I was getting an asset here, right? I understand what I'm doing. I'm getting a permanent right to compete in this league and to grow this league with my partner, the league, and the other teams. At some point in the last year, Forbes decided, hey, these things have gotten big enough. Let's release some esports team valuations. The type's a little small for you to read back there. Suffice it to say, this is a list of the top 12 esports teams according to Forbes. It ranges from $50 million on the low end in valuation to $310 on the high end. I am not saying this list is accurate, but take it maybe with a pound of salt. But it is. But it is directionally accurate, right? There are esports teams that are raising at these types of valuations right now. And again, we're in the bottom half of the first inning of this thing in terms of growth and development. So the franchise leagues, we'll talk about them a lot today. Your crash course is that there are 3 of them currently active. You have the Overwatch League, which is a Blizzard Activision title, and then you have the European and North American leagues. This is just in the West, by the way. There are some franchise leagues in China. I'm kind of keeping this as simplified as possible. I don't want to go too global on all of you, right? You'll see some significant price tags up there, right? 10 million US to get into one of the Riot leagues. You'll see a price tag of 20 to 60 million, which are the reported. We know the season 1 valuations of the Overwatch League were 20 million. It's been reported they were up to $60 million in season 2, right? So not bad from a 1-year development in terms of growth of franchise value. We've had major big brands pour into the space, both at the franchise league level. You saw some logos at the bottom, but in the last, year alone, you've had Dr. Pepper, Chipotle, AT&T, Puma, the list goes, Nissan. The list goes on in terms of major and non-endemic brands that have started sponsoring esports teams. We've created real synergies between the games themselves and the esports league. So in the game Overwatch, if you are a fan of a particular team, you can buy an LA Valiant jersey, and you can rep the LA Valiant in-game wearing your team's colors and a skin of your favorite hero. All this is to say, I don't know when the inflection point happened. Reasonable minds can disagree on that. We could go back to our timeline, and I'm sure we could have a debate about that. It doesn't really matter to me so much, right? Sometime between here and here, esports became a major business. And this is what it looks like today. And if we were to put a graph of the traditional sports business up here, it would look a heck of a lot like this too, to say nothing of all of the ancillary businesses you could build around it, from camps to youth leagues to data, coaching and analytics sites, fantasy and betting, right? So we now live in a world in which the esports ecosystem is structured a lot like traditional sports. There are some key differences we'll get into on the panel, and that was your crash course on esports.
Okay. Maybe 10 years. Okay, not 5 years, maybe 10 years. By the way, when first time Bryce spoke, he said something which was highly offensive to me, which is, of course, why I have him on the panel. Someone asked him about what's the future of esports? And I remember he said, well, every time an older person dies, 2 esports athletes are born.
I think I actually said every day a baseball fan dies and 2 esports fans are born.
It could have been baseball fan. Okay, well, I'm a baseball fan. But basically, the business plan is for me to die, okay? I had some problems with it, although I think it's probably statistically accurate. I'm not going anywhere, so I better start learning about this stuff. So let's dive in a little deeper. That was 101. Let's go to esports 201. Start with you, Chopper. We've talked a little bit about it already, but why don't you give everybody a little sense of what part of the esports ecosystem you are in and Riot is in?
Sure. So one of the things that's fundamentally different about esports than traditional sports is that we are a 3-party system as opposed to 2. When you think of football or basketball or baseball, the league itself is comprised of the teams, and so they are one and the same. Teams own the league, and then there's players as the second body. But with any esport, you have the publisher who owns the IP of the game in the mix. So Riot, which is the company that I work for, is the publisher and developer of League of Legends. We own the IP for that game. It's like owning the rights to basketball. And so in this case, we work with the teams as an independent party and the players as an independent party to facilitate the competitive play of League of Legends. Now, in that space, we've had to fill a lot of shoes. We've had to be, at times, ESPN in that we're broadcasting our games. We are essentially the NBA in that we're also like the ones who are operating the league and putting on all the matches. But we also have to think about what's best for basketball in general, which is a complicated question sometimes because you have to consider both the pro level and the casual level of play that Bryce was talking about. So for us, what we aspire to do is to create really kind of memorable experiences for our fans that encourage them to both watch the game, but also to play the game more. And so we're constantly thinking about the sort of circular ecosystem of our players and our fans that drives them to engage as widely as they can without sort of cannibalizing any of the individual areas.
Yeah. Which reminds me an awful lot of that's what they used to say about soccer. The way to get soccer more popular was first you had them play, starting at age 3 where it's obligatory to play soccer. And then once they understood the sport, then they started watching it. Chuck, how do you and AEG touch esports and vice versa?
In a couple of different places, really. I mean, if Chopper and Ari are the product and the people, we're the place. We represent the venues around the world where a lot of the major championships happen, as well as some of the league matches as well. We've had, by the time the summer's over, we'll have had 3 League of Legends World Finals. We've had Continental and Hemispheric Finals. We've had Overwatch League Finals. So we're really the big venues, stadiums and arenas where it all takes place. And then also, as we kick it to Ari, we have a position in Immortals, the team. We were one of the stick and ball sports companies that jumped in at the ownership level and investor level in esports.
And Chuck, you play and you watch, right?
I do, yeah. I'm CS:GO and Fortnite principally, and I do watch on a regular basis.
And your kids beat the hell out of you, right?
Believe it or not, neither of my kids who are 26 and 23 play.
I want to meet them. I feel like I know them.
They're outliers in my family, and they're out of the will.
Tell them to put on a suit and tie and come and talk to me. We'll have a good time. Ari, how about you? We know a little bit about what you do from Chuck. Tell us a little more.
Yeah, so we have our company, our holding company is called IGC, which stands for Immortals Gaming Club, and we have 2 principal businesses. One is an esports team organization, so we operate multiple esports brands. One of those brands, Immortals, will return to LCS next year. We're currently participating in LCS under the Optic brand. We also operate the LA Valiant, which is an LA-based geolocated franchise in Blizzard's Overwatch League. As Richard was saying, we operate MIBR. We are actually the only esports organization of any scale that operates 3 or more brands. So we have a family of brands approach as opposed to an umbrella brand approach, which is a huge contrast between esports and traditional sports. We are clearly an outlier. The market will determine over many years if we're right or wrong, but certainly we are standalone as of now. Our other businesses, we operate a matchmaking software platform in Brazil. No, that's not like Tinder for gaming, although it kind of is, and by the way, Tinder is one of our partners. And we can talk about that. I think the reason that's relevant is Bryce had a really interesting slide that showed kind of where esports sits in the broader gaming ecosystem. And so one of the things that we think about quite a lot is how do you use the access that we have as teams to high affinity, early adopting, generally high discretionary income fans to penetrate into the broader aspects of the overall gaming pyramid. I mean, it is a step function change, an exponential difference between the esports market and the gaming market. And folks like AEG are working with us so that we can work collaboratively to figure out the ways to penetrate into the bigger parts of that market.
Right. You'll notice he said brand. Okay, brand is, I have found out, I went to a conference, I spoke at a conference about 2 months ago, and I told them what I do is brand marketing. And someone literally, I said, any questions? They raised their hands, they said, did you change your name? Did you change your name for your career? No, I was always Rich Brand. Literally, they asked me the question. What does that have to do with esports? Absolutely nothing. Bryce, what do you have to do with esports?
Yeah, so I kind of sit at the independent part of this and work a little bit with everybody. Sometimes, there are clients. Other times, it's just collaboratively on the other side of the table. So I really have two jobs, right? So I'm a lawyer, I'm a consultant. I work throughout the space on the law firm side. If you were to list the biggest 20 Western esports teams, we rep about 15 to 17 of them, depending on who you happen to put at the end of the list. We also work with a lot of big broadcast talent and third-party businesses related to space. On the consulting side, my job is essentially to translate esports for folks from the traditional sports media and entertainment world. So I've done everything from working with big sports teams as they figure out how to deploy capital in the space. Do we want to buy a team? Do we want to start one? Should we care about teams at all? To working with big brands and helping them activate, or investors, everything from family offices to venture on how they should think about the space and deploy capital.
Like an SAT tutor, right? You teach people how to do this stuff.
I speak esports.
Ari, you come from traditional sports. You were Arizona Coyotes. You're here now in an esports platform. What's the difference? I mean, I think one of the things Chopper mentioned was, unlike other sports, esports are actually owned as opposed to other things. But what are some of the distinctions that you're seeing that affect either the growth or the lack of growth in esports?
Well, I think Chopper smartly honed in on the critical structural difference, which is, there's 3 legs of the stool, and one of those legs is much bigger and more important than the others, and that's the publisher, the IP owner. That doesn't exist in traditional sports. I guess there's a lot of time spent thinking about how esports and traditional sports are different. I think it's almost perhaps more interesting to talk about how they're similar, because if you can understand that similarity, all of the things that Bryce was saying about kind of the underlying macro factors that make esports so interesting start to make sense. So we've done some psychographic surveying of fans and community members at every stop in my career: Anaheim Ducks, Arizona Coyotes, NHL League Office, and now IGC Immortals. And Chuck has been either at the table with me or across the table or around the table if it was a round table in many of those stops. So he's familiar with this data too. But it turns out that whether you're in an amazing hockey market like Southern California or a terrible hockey market like Arizona or New York or Boston, or you're in an esports team that has an undefined geographic territory, there's principally 3 reasons why people connect to this kind of content. We call it, as we kind of winnow down all of the words into 3 things that kind of cover it all and are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive: hype, mastery, and community. It's this idea when you're in a venue, hopefully an AEG venue, that something happens and you don't need to know what's going on to feel something. If aliens came to Earth and they saw Blake Griffin dunking over a Kia, my guess is that would feel different than me missing a free throw in my childhood home. There's just something about seeing feats of excellence with other people. It's the same reason it's fun to see a comedy in a theater. The second is mastery. Esports or competitive activities generally have a way of organizing competition in a way that makes sense and is understood, and so that you, the viewer, just get it that you're seeing something that you couldn't achieve and that's rare and special. There's a reason why, like, the people in Athens and the people in Sparta thought that running and throwing stuff was cool and interesting. And it's because they were all doing these things and wanted to see who was the best at it. And when they saw who was the immediately available a best person, they wanted to see what that person did against all the other people in the world. So it's this mastery of the thing. And then finally, it's community. It's being able to do these things together. Why are people on NBA Twitter? That makes zero sense at all. Watching other people tweet about NBA stuff that you could watch on TV is even crazier than people watching other people play video games. And yet that's like the highest growth path of the NBA, is Twitter feeding the conversation of the NBA outside of the content itself. So hype, community, and mastery. And we see those things in every competitive activity. We see those things in every content activity. And those things are every bit as true in esports as they are in traditional sports.
Chopper, thoughts on the growth of the industry, the dynamic aspects that we were talking about?
I mean, it's been explosive. I've been at Riot for almost 7 years. I came on board in 2012 when we were first building out the esport effort. And I think, you can appreciate some of it visually. The pictures that Bryce showed of what we affectionately call the basement, our tournament in 2011, and then the World Cup stadium we sold out last year. We were in the Bird's Nest Stadium, the Beijing Olympic Stadium the year before that. And it's easy to look at those and kind of see the visual growth. But for us, what's also just as compelling is the growth in reach and in engagement. Not only are we seeing 1 million people tune in for that 2011 World Championship, and then 99.6 million people tune in for that 2018 World Championship, we're seeing them tune in for longer. They're spending more time watching. They're spending more time watching throughout the season as we've now built out regular season content for these. They're investing more time with the teams in their ecosystems through fan communities. And what's really compelling to me about esports compared to traditional sports is there's so many additional channels for engagement, and the primary one here is streaming. And it's really important to note the impact that this has, because without this, I don't think esports gets off the ground in nearly the fashion that it does. Streaming is where an esport athlete can play their game of choice, and they're essentially practicing, but they're live streaming to a community, and they're answering questions, and they're engaging with that community. They're rewarding, members for subscribing and doing all sorts of stuff there. And it's the equivalent essentially of if I could just watch LeBron and the Lakers practice all the time and then type in like, hey LeBron, why'd you miss that J? And he'd like answer me back, which is a little weird to think about in the context of traditional sports. Like there's no way I'm ever gonna even see that practice, much less get the answer. But this is the world that esports grew up in. It grew up in an incredibly visible world where players almost felt required to interact with their fans on a far deeper level than any traditional sports athlete has ever even considered. And so because of that, the allegiance from our fans to these players is incredibly durable. And you'll see them shift as Superstar goes from team to team to team. Now, the challenge for us is that as we continue to think about a league that we hope will last decades, the allegiance should naturally start to shift to teams. Because what used to be a situation where the player was more likely to stick around than the team in the case of a promotion relegation world, in a franchise world, the team is going to be the long-lasting, kind of durable icon that we want to tie support to. So, just thinking about the way that esports began, that deep player connection, and the upcoming transition to team, I think is a really interesting challenge for us. But it's certainly, without Twitch and some of those other early streaming services, there wouldn't have nearly been the ramp that you saw, so visually through Bryce's presentation.
Chuck, it's an interesting point we're making, and of course you too come from traditional and non-traditional. I mean, AEG they do a little traditional sports here and there, right? It's not all esports, not yet.
Not yet, no, we do own the LA Kings.
But you have a tremendous ability to sort of differentiate because you're sitting there on both sides. What do you see the big differences are in terms of the traditional sports, the esports, and how, as an organization like AEG, you manage it? Is it the same thing, different, or do you have a completely different model?
I mean, every sport and every endeavor has its level of avidity. And as Chopper said, what we're seeing in esports is that the people who consume the games have got a significantly higher level of avidity because they have access. They have access that traditional sports don't provide necessarily. Certainly the advent of social media and players being able to bypass the traditional media and go to their fans through social media platforms has helped. But from day one, It's as though the esports athletes have been real and they've been among us, and let's face it, they frankly look a lot more like us than I look like Kevin Durant. And you know, there's a relatability that I think that fans have to esports athletes that is really cool and pretty unique in the world of sports. And that, you know, that's what we try to do, you know, with folks on our global partnerships team that are here. We try to see how we can bridge the gap between the two. What can we learn from the LA Kings that we can help Immortals with? What can we learn from Immortals that we can help the LA Galaxy with? You know, early on, before we actually got involved in the team side of things, when we were making our first forays as hosts of games, I started to visit all of the gaming houses here in LA, where Team Liquid was and others, and said, this is no different than watching the LA Galaxy train. Except they all lived together, which was kind of strange at the time. But they've got physios training them. They've got team psychologists working them. They got nutritionists helping them decide what to eat. They practice 4 to 5 hours a day. They go to the gym in the morning. I said, this is absolutely no different than what we do with the LA Galaxy and the LA Kings and the LA Lakers. So how could we as a traditional sports organization take the things that we learned and help move them into the esports world, and then how can we also learn from esports? That's what we're trying to do every day in the space.
Bryce, thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what was said. You know, I really liked the way Ari framed the fandom element of this, because it drills down on, I think, something where we are the same, but it appears different, right? Because we're not geolocated, because we haven't had a generation of like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to watch every sport with my kids, and I'm also going to watch the big esports as well, and they'll probably naturally become a fan of the teams I'm a fan of, just like I naturally got brainwashed into being, you know, a Mariners fan and a Seahawks fan, which has worked out, a Sonics fan, which has not worked out, right? So we don't have some of these things, right? We're not getting fandom passed from our cities or our parents yet, but it really is about where we can access that community, right? And we're starting to see that shift go on now as esports look to the traditional sports model and say, hey, there's a lot of advantages, right, to localization in terms of creating fans, in terms of monetization, and we can access those things. The only other point I'd make is just to echo what Chopper was talking about, Twitch, right? This is an area where esports are ahead of traditional sports in terms of content distribution. If you look at any data around cable TV subscriptions, they all say the same thing, right? This business is dying, and pretty quickly. Meanwhile, esports were born in the digital age, and so we're much better at creating content the way younger people like to consume that content, and creating access and engagement points. You know, one of the key elements of Twitch that Chop was alluding to is Twitch chat. It gives you the chance to interact with the content creator. It also gives you a chance to interact with the other people who are watching. And so you can simulate the experience of being in the stadium. You know, the moment that I showed you in the League of Legends World Championships in 2018, if you had been on Twitch at the time, not just watching the content, but the Twitch chat itself, Twitch chat explodes, right? And all the people who are happy Team Liquid won are cheering. All the people who are sad TSM lost are saying very angry things about their team, right? Some not so nice things about the players, as you can imagine. It is the digital equivalent of being in the stadium for the big moment. And I think there's a lot of things that traditional sports can learn from esports about how to engage that audience from home.
I just want to make one more point. Chuck made a really subtle but excellent point, I think, when he used the word avidity rather than just affinity to describe the esports fan. So how many people in this room watched the Super Bowl this year? Put your hands up. How many people have played football in the last 12 months? Right? No one. And that would be true for 100 million people around the world if we're rounding. But if we ask the 100 million people who watched League of Legends World Championships last year, how many of them played, close to 100 million people would keep their hand raised. And so there is both a connection to the content because you are a player, and you are a player who is ranked, who knows everything about how you stack up against the rest of the world. And there's also a didactic component to the viewing experience in that people are watching not just because they're enjoying it or because it's communal, but because they're actually watching it to improve their own gameplay. So like the half-life of esports content is dramatically different than live sports, which, you know, expire pretty much immediately.
But you had to be fair. So how many of you have played esports? Super Bowl wins. Okay, Super Bowl wins. 4 people played football, 2 people played. And this is your target audience, right? This is it. Perhaps, or our children, perhaps.
Customer acquisition gets pretty pricey for these folks.
Yeah. So let's switch. Since we started talking a little bit about the markets in traditional sports, let's talk about something which does have a small amount of significance in the sports world: media rights, media strategy, otherwise known as money. Media is a big part of everything. How, and we can start with you, Chuck. How, when you're framing the media strategy for an esports league, an esports team, an esports event, is it, and when you're trying to come up with the right model for media content and display and obviously monetizing it, what's the differences there? What's the strategy for esports? Is it the same old strategy, you know, as if you do a media rights agreement for the Galaxy, you do one for the Lakers, you go out, you find, it used to be traditional, now it's not traditional, now it's streaming and it's all the other stuff in all the sports. Is it the same thing, different sport, or is there a different model?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, we're a little short on time.
No, I mean,
No.
I will certainly let the people that are deeper in the space answer it much more eloquently than I could. But no, to me, it's completely different. It's a completely different model, a completely different animal. And frankly, traditional stick and ball sports can learn a lot going forward from esports in how the content is presented.
Chopper, media strategy. Not an unimportant element to esports, right?
Absolutely not.
It's critical to everything.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at any traditional sport and you look at the monetization that fuels those leagues, it's almost always predominantly between like home-based concessions, gate, and local activation, and then media and content distribution. And given that we have one collective studio where we house all of our games, we're not necessarily pushing that local gate strategy as much. So we really need to maximize what we can for media and distribution. Riot in particular is in kind of a weird spot when it comes to this because very early on, when we were kind of putting out esports back in 2012, we took all of the rights in-house, where we had previously been working with a lot of third-party providers and tournament organizers. And part of the reason for that was because in that era, it was kind of the Wild West. It was really difficult to follow. You didn't know what streaming site the matches were going to be on. Most of them were charging you for HD access. And we believed that that was the biggest impediment to the esport catching on, was that there were so many barriers to entry that people were just going to give up and not kind of subscribe for the long term. So we made a public announcement back in the end of 2012 that we were going to be taking them in-house and we were going to make sure that HD was available for free forever for every game. Now, that's obviously an expensive promise to make, and we have had to reconcile with that over the years. And so what we look to do is find the partners that allow us the greatest reach. Predominantly, that's been Twitch and YouTube. League of Legends is a game that requires an internet connection. It requires a PC to play. Twitch and YouTube are two of the biggest viewing platforms and content distributors online. It made sense for us to go there. What we've started to do is we've started to look towards additional platforms to see if there's other markets that we can tap into, potentially with other content. So we've broached linear programming. We've worked with platforms like Turner to put on things like an eSport 101, where we talked a little bit about how League of Legends is played. We're currently broadcast on ESPN Plus, trying to kind of target a little bit of a different segment there. So right now, we're primarily looking at getting the greatest reach out of it and then effectively monetizing through sponsorship and other distribution means once we've built that large audience. But you know, other distributors and other titles don't necessarily have the same complications we do. You know, other titles are free to kind of take their programming off to a third-party platform and monetize there. So, you know, the way that we have it set up is a little bit unique, but I would say by and large, the industry has focused on Twitch and YouTube as their primary delivery mechanisms, and is really just now starting to try and figure out linear programming, especially in the West.
Ari, best media strategy? Is it linear? Is it a combination? Is it not linear? TBD?
Well, I guess if we're being literal about linear, I think any media strategy that both starts and stops with linear is destined to fail.
Right.
But I think even linear has some contemplation of digital and over the top in today's day and age. I think you know, we think a lot about what does it look like 5 or 10 years from now, so that we can position our company and our assets to be in the right place at the right time when these things start to converge. Interestingly, esports on linear tends to perform better than you might think in two ways. One, the rating is higher, and two, the tune-out rate is lower than you might think. In other words, if someone turns on TBS and E-League happens to be on, you'd think that that would be jarring and they'd maybe tune it off, change a channel. Or if they turned on ABC on a Sunday night and Overwatch League was on, that they'd turn that off. And it turns out they don't. And there's a lot of potential reasons for that. One is curiosity, another is total household, a third is just like the sense that something competitive is happening and wanting to view that. As a practical matter, we as a company are betting our entire existence on the idea that live content and live rights matter. If that's not true, all of these companies are out of business. Chopper's fine, trust me. But esports organizations, and maybe Bryce too, are in big, big trouble. But whether there's migration to other platforms, I think everybody who is connected to media is pretty convinced that there's a long and fruitful future for live rights. And the way that gets carved up and portioned out, I think, remains to be seen. But the linear story in combination with an OTT present is actually very compelling.
Yeah. Well, Ari, just to be clear, Bryce is a consultant and a lawyer. He's fine. Okay. It doesn't even matter. Whatever you do, he's fine.
As a client, I can tell you if we all went away, he wouldn't be taking us out to such nice dinners.
At the very least, I would be sad.
It would be very sad. We wouldn't get to hang out nearly as much.
Like in and out and stuff like that, or
really nice
awesome
stuff.
You can get it with the sauce.
I let him get a milkshake too.
Yeah. So we're hiring you. The three of these guys are hiring you. The consultant. Come up with a good media strategy. What are you thinking?
I think I would build on everything that everyone has said. I think esports media strategy does and should look fundamentally differently than how we look at stick and ball sports media strategy. The audience is much younger, and so we're at the forefront of a lot of trends here. One, mass distribution of content, right? Traditional sports optimize for the highest dollars they can get, and so they sign exclusive deals, right? Chopper already said, for example, the LCS is broadcast on YouTube and Twitch. I promise you they get more direct money out of it if they sell the exclusive rights to one of them, right? They're choosing not to optimize for that. They could also get more direct revenues out of it if they charged for it at all, right? We're so used to traditional sports existing behind the paywall of cable TV, and that's just not the case in esports, where it's mass distributed in HD for free. Right? So it's a totally different dynamic. Linear often, particularly in current times, has become a piece of the strategy. I think it's good for hitting certain audiences. I think it's also good from a legitimization perspective, particularly as you're trying to garner major non-endemic sponsorship money, and the CROs of these companies are not, the 28-year-old who grew up consuming all of their content online. And so seeing something on ESPN or ABC or TBS matters, right? So I think linear should be a part of the media rights equation right now, but I think long run, esports is going to be the first to abandon that as a necessary thing, and I think traditional sports are going to follow in the footsteps of esports as it relates to how their content is distributed, how it's monetized, and what their overall strategy is, because esports are engaging an audience that is only going to grow over time in terms of what they expect from their viewing experience.
Right. Each of you have mentioned, Chopper, you mentioned the word sponsorship keeps coming up, okay? And I know I do a lot of naming rights and sponsorship type deals. I also do media rights deals. And I know in a lot of the traditional sports, the sponsorships are great, the naming rights are great, but you get one good media rights deal, and that pays an awful lot of money. Now, let's take I'm looking at something, I looked something up before this panel. The biggest revenue stream for esports is sponsorships and advertising. The statistic I saw is they're estimating about $460 million this year in sponsorship revenue. So Chopper, in terms of the opportunities for sponsorship in esports, is this something that is going to be growing diametrically? Is it something that can level off? Where do you see the big sponsorship opportunities?
One thing that we've really tried to do is find more unique value propositions for our sponsors as time has gone on. I think when we started reaching out to sponsors in 2013 and 2014, our offering was very nondescript and very a la carte. It was, we can put a logo bug on the stream here, you can be on the mic stand, you can be on a step and repeat, like very standard fare. And it did okay because people saw the audience that we have. But as time grew, we discovered that by creating more custom offerings, we're actually creating a much better opportunity for sponsors to engage with us. So when we went and we were talking with State Farm, we asked them, what is the way that you guys see yourselves interacting with esports? This is kind of a new space for you. And they said, well, in all traditional sports, we usually have the halftime desk. Like we have we kind of center around analysis. And we're like, well, great, we have an analyst desk. And now if you actually poll the community, most times they'll actually refer to it as the State Farm analyst desk because the branding has been so tight in correlating that product with the brand. And so for me, it's opportunities like that. It's finding really discrete branding opportunities to bring in high value organic brands that make sense in the space. We've been very careful over the years to protect the space from brands that don't make sense, that just want to capitalize on the eyeballs that we have. And make no mistake, the eyeballs that we have are valuable. For any given company, the 18 to 30, 18 to 34-year-old demographic is pretty much what you're looking for. And for most traditional sports out there, their percentage of their audience that is comprised of that age group tops out in the 20%. I think the NBA gets maybe between 25 and 30. For us, it's like 86%. We actually have more 18 to 30-year-olds watching at any given minute than baseball or hockey or soccer. It's only basketball and the NFL that are ahead of esports, specifically League of Legends as the data point here. And that trend is shifting in esports favor. So there's an incredibly valuable audience out there. We know that. And so what we want to do is find the right way to allow those brands in so that they can effectively communicate their brand proposition and deliver a lot of value down to our fans at the end of the day.
Chuck, trends, opportunities in esports sponsorship, what are you seeing? What are you thinking?
Geolocation of the teams, I think, is going to be really, really key and really important. One of the challenges we had early on in the space when we were representing big events, you'd go to an agency and they'd say, and we'd talk about the numbers and the global distribution, they'd say, well, we're just the agency for the United States. You're going to have to go to the agency in Korea and the agency in Europe. And you'd end up walking out of there going, we're not going to get a penny out of these guys because they can't figure it out. Geolocation is going to be huge, and the ability for teams to garner local sponsorships, the ability for leagues to bring umbrella sponsorship in, I think is going to drive the needle more than anything in the space.
Ari, thoughts?
Well, number one, I think there's definitely upside to the 460 number. For incompetence reasons, really, on both the esports side and the brand side. I think these are kind of people speaking two different languages and don't really understand each other yet. And as they actually grow to understand each other more, I think that number just has like significant upside, even if nothing else changes. We come at it a little bit differently than others. I mean, this is part of our kind of family of brand strategy. We believe that what really moves the needle ultimately is not just reach, but engagement. And if you hear CMOs of major companies like Burger King or AT&T or T-Mobile talking about what they're thinking of, they'll always talk about engagement as the new currency of sponsorship. And if you have an umbrella brand that's intended to talk to 14 different fan segments, which might be from different geographies or different ages or play games or watch games on different platforms, and you're only communicating through one brand, what we believe is that ultimately will dilute the possibility of connection. Whereas if you have a pure play brand, you can have a much deeper connection with your fan. And so our engagement rate across all of our brands tend to be much higher. Now up until last week when we made a big acquisition, we didn't have the reach to really bully ourselves into the room and be able to move the needle for brands across a broad swath of total audience. But in micro segments, we were able to outperform our competition pretty significantly. Now, when you pair that engagement with reach, we feel, at least on our company, there's really significant upside. Just two stats that I think are relevant and germane to the discussion. While people think of the esports audience as being like not necessarily brand loyal, they are hyper brand aware. So there is 70% unaided recall of fans for esports sponsorship. So 70+% of the people who watch League of Legends will be able to know that there's an association with State Farm. That's compared to something like 20 to 35% in traditional sports. And number two, there's massive like on-site sampling potential. So for example, in a recent event, a beer brand that had 2 points of sale in the arena actually sold 90% of the beer on site because they were the sponsor of the event. And those are dynamics that you just don't see in traditional sports.
Well, I know we're very short on time. I did want to give people a chance to ask questions if anyone does have questions. But does anyone have questions, just to see? Because I certainly have another. Back there? Yes, you?
Hi, my name's Arent Bryce. I'm at Activision Blizzard. Just had a question. None of you have touched on, or I think in the timeline it touched a little bit on the youth aspect of it, and either high school or college. Can you touch on that? I don't know, maybe Chopper, if that's more from a League of Legends standpoint.
Sure. Very quickly, we believe that the building down is incredibly important. Over the last several years, we focused on what we believe to be the top of the competitive pyramid, which was building out the professional leagues to create the aspirational element that everything would then work up to. And we knew that because League was so popular, the grassroots element was already starting to happen. But what we're doing right now is we're really trying to formalize it. So we're working with colleges and conferences around the country to coordinate gameplay. There's over 80 schools around North America where you can actually get a scholarship for playing League of Legends now. And we're then rolling that down into high school as well. So we're partnering with a company called PlayVersus, who has us in, I think, 25 states as a varsity sport that can be played in high schools. And we're developing everything from summer camps to extracurricular clubs. Our belief is that League can teach you all of the same things that sports can, but potentially in a physically safer fashion. And so, we're really trying to roll that down as far as we can, because we believe that that'll not only create the next generation of superstars, but it also creates the next generation of fans. To the point, if you played soccer when you were 3, you're much more likely to watch the World Cup now. If you play League of Legends in high school, we think that you're more likely to be a fan for the next decade. So definitely something that we're working on right now and is a very explosive growth area.
And related to that, one quick question I had, diversity, particularly gender. I think it's fair to say that esports is a little bit tilted towards male versus female. What's going on there as far as, are there initiatives underway to try and move the needle a little bit or a lot? Or, I mean, because I think I'm right, just in terms of statistically, that is probably an issue going forward. Any thoughts from any of you on, what can or should or is being done?
Sure, I'm happy to take it. So first, difference between gaming and esports, like of the 2.5 billion gamers around the world, roughly half are women, but of esports fans, it's roughly 70-30 male-female. So huge market opportunity if people can actually lean into diversity. From our standpoint, as a company, our mission is to build the world's most inclusive and connected community of gamers. We focus on diversity a lot. Gender diversity, I think, is one of many places where you can have an impact. We had a Girls in Gaming Summit presented by Microsoft last year. It was attended by 500 people. 10,000 people watched it live. Hundreds of thousands of people have watched it since. And there are partnerships underway with folks like AEG, with entities like League of Legends, Activision Blizzard certainly too, that are working on gender diversity in all sorts of ways, including, by the way, celebrating heroes of diversity in the games. So breaking down those barriers for the players themselves, not even at the esports level. So more work to be done, but there's certainly good traction.
Great. Back there, someone held up a sign that said 0. It used to be 5, now it's 0. I'm thinking 0 means we're done.
That's actually the moderator's score.
Was that the right number? Okay. See that 0? That means Rich, be quiet. Okay, take your suit and tie and go. But before I go, I want to just thank you guys. This was everything I hoped it would be, meaning I didn't do too much damage to the crowd, and you guys just sort of filled in all of the blanks. So I thought this was terrific. From 101 to 201, I want to thank you all, guys.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you.
All right.
Awesome.
The benefit of being actually in the room is that you get to talk to these people afterwards. The day is not even close to being done. We have 3 more events still to come today: a panel, an interview, and a party or a reception. So right now we're going to give you 10 minutes. My clock says 4 minutes after 4. At 14 minutes after 4, we begin with our next panel. Go ahead and talk to the individuals. One of the questions I would have asked is, if I had $50,000 or $100,000 to spend to put my toe in the water of esports, where is the opportunity? Go find out. In the meantime, have a short break. We'll be right back.
Where are you, buddy? What's going on? Yeah.
It's awesome. Thank you.
I'll be right back.
Yes.
A couple of them to go for the Canadian delegates.
We're taking pictures. Let's ask if they'll do that. Get them while they're posing.
Hey, how are you? What's going on?
We got all of us here.
What are you up to? Just hanging out, telling jokes.
Oh, baby.
Oh, God.
I don't think we have.
Last time I saw him do this, he wasn't smiling.
Great to meet you.
He didn't change his name.
Played right.
Brandon, yeah.
Head left, head right.
They did ask me that. Hi. Oh, that's right. Oh, that was a long time ago. Very nice to see you. Oh, yes, I am.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
Group shot.
yeah, get in here, guys. Come on.
There we go. All my buddies.
It's esports now.
Put your arm around.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Do we need to give our mics back really quickly?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think you probably do need the mics. Pardon?
Thank you very much.
Really are, aren't they? Makes it easier.
We get
Maple
that's what I'm
syrup.
talking about. Close. Right there.
Thank you. You said you were going to do that.
I couldn't help myself.
You said you were going to do that. You broke the promise. Do I need to pick this up?
You can do whatever is easiest.
I can do whatever.
Take you guys up.